Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kambiz Ranavardi, board member for ColumbiaDC and a graduate of the School of Engineering and Applied Science. First, I would like to thank our partners for this evening, the Yale Club of Washington, D.C., and their members for joining us. We are very privileged to host and introduce Mordecai Kurz, Joan, Kenney, Professor of Economics, Emeritus at the Stanford University, to talk to us about the market power of technology, an understanding of the second Gilded Age. And this will be in conversation with Lena Jamali, who is a senior reporter for Marketplace. I'd like to add that this is the title of Mordecai's most recent book. You can find the link to the book on our website, also in our reminder emails, and I will make sure to send the link with a discount code within the 24 hours of this event, and the link to the recording of this event. So please be on the lookout for that. Please allow me to briefly introduce our speakers, but I do encourage everyone to check our website for their complete bios. Mordecai Kurz served as the economics director of Stanford's Institute for Mathematical Studies in Social Sciences from 71 to 89. He was a Guggenheim Fellow in 77, a Fellow of the Institute for Advanced Studies of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, 79, and has been a Fellow of the Econometric Society since 71. He also served as a Special Economic Advisor to President Carter's Commission on Pension Policy in 1979. Among his research work are problems in economic theory and policy, growth theory, game theory, the formation of beliefs, and the effect of market power on inequality and growth. And our host, Lena Jamali, is a senior reporter for Marketplace covering business and the economy. Before that, she was a co-host at KQED's The California Report. In the past, she has also worked for Bloomberg TV, Reuters TV, and also as a freelance foreign correspondent. Lily holds a master's degree from Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, an MBA in finance from Stern, and a bachelor's degree in English from UCLA. Mordecai, Lily, welcome.
Thank you so much. And it is always such a privilege to participate in talks organized by the Columbia Club of DC, including this one co-sponsored by the Yale Club. And Kambiz, I'm so grateful to you for all the hard work you put into making these events happen. So thank you. As a journalist at Marketplace, my colleagues and I spend our days trying to make sense of the economy. We like to say that our aim is to raise the nation's economic intelligence. And you can't do the stories that we do without running headlong into the issue of inequality, which is a central theme in the American story right now and has major implications for our nation's politics. It's hard to grasp how we got here without a solid understanding of US economic history, including but not limited to the part that starts during the Reagan era. One thing I really appreciated about Professor Kurz's approach in his new book is the choice to start his analysis a full century before that, in 1889, the beginning of the first Gilded Age. And tonight we're going to be exploring the parallels between that era and the second Gilded Age, which we are living through right now. In his book, Professor Kurz argues that market power is a major cause of inequality, and incumbents in the tech industry in particular have gotten really good at building protective moats around themselves. Tonight, we're going to talk about why competition doesn't solve the problem of monopoly power in tech. We're going to look at what policy looks like right now. We're going to discuss how it can be better. And we're also going to be opening up the discussion to all of you in the audience about halfway through our session. So that would be in about 45 minutes, but you're welcome to start putting your questions in the chat now. And we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. So first of all, a warm welcome to you, Mordecai.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
I wanted to begin by sort of giving you a chance to talk through the body of theory that you lay out in the book. So you explore the effect of market monopoly power on the economy. And I thought we could begin with what the source of that power is. Can you explain what it is and how we misunderstand it?
Yes, the main source that I'm concentrating on is technology. And it is somewhat surprising because we know very well that technology is the main source of progress, of increasing standard of living and improved incomes. Yet technology also has the opposite side, the negative side, the dark side of creating market power. The market power comes as a consequence of the innovator receiving a monopoly over that intellectual property, with intellectual property rights on the asset, on the knowledge which is embodied in the technology. Now, this is different. And by the way, this therefore creates a fundamental tension and creates between progress and market power. And that tension is the thing that makes the whole study important, difficult, and subtle. This is very different than market power under the antitrust law, which considers the market power which is created by humans through collusion, through the creation of barriers to entry, and other means by which human beings prevent competitors from entering the market. I'm not saying that monopoly power of the second sort does not exist, but I believe, and the data and the evidence is overwhelming, that the most important force that explains the rising market power in the last 40 years is technology.
And what did you learn in the course of doing your research about how this monopoly power grows?
An innovator receives an advantage over other competitors in any market. It takes the form of patent or a secret or any other legal intellectual property right. It is supported by our policy, but that is only initial stage. Over time, the firms use multiple strategies. And in chapter 1 of my book, I list about 11 different strategies which are used by firms. The most obvious ones are technological updates, by which there's, issue number 1, issue number 2, issue number 3, and then you get to iPhone number 13. These are typically, they could be very minor. Then there is also multi-layers of patents, interrelated patents, all of which are connected so that they create literally an empire of patents that anybody who tries to enter is confronted with. And the most important is acquisitions. Firms acquire technologies of competitors, either use them or suppress them. And as example for that is Microsoft has inside of it 237 companies. 237 companies in one company called Microsoft. Similar number in Google. Amazon has 105. But same thing with Johnson & Johnson or other companies. It's not only these. And finally, very often these purchases, these acquisitions are made in order to suppress the technology, not to develop it at all. So these activities together, they create an amalgam of technologies, interrelated technologies, becomes an empire, technological empire, way past the level at which they themselves innovated. In other words, they own much more than those technologies that they themselves innovated. This process is the way market power rises. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, this will not happen if policy will not stop. If policy will facilitate that. Policy has public policy has to allow that to happen. I will argue that public policy is the most important force that can possibly stop that. But the rise of market power is a consequence of multi-strategies of companies, of assembling technologies together so that they become interrelated technologies that control a whole hemisphere, economic hemisphere.
And we're going to return to that policy issue, which you mentioned. Hopefully, we'll spend a good chunk of time on that because it's so important and such a big part of your writing in the book. You give the example also of Apple, which is, in some senses, unrivaled within the smartphone space. And what I found very compelling was this idea that Apple doesn't actually hold a, giant proportion of market share in terms of percentage. But when you look at revenue, you get a really different story of just how dominant Apple is. So I was wondering if you could use that as an example, kind of going back to some of the things you just talked about with respect to how a company can build its monopoly power using these different methods that you were discussing a moment ago.
Well, this is the key point is in the Apple example, the most important thing is to see that Apple is actually a relatively small player in the smartphone business. That they're selling into the market in which they sell is the smartphone business. They control only 14% of the sales in the unit sales of smartphones every year. Only 14%. However, because their technology is so superior and so desired by the public, and it contains enormous number of ideas, by the way, that were financed by the government, not only by Apple, but that's another story. And the consequence of that is that they are able to charge much, much higher price, and therefore they control the top quality of the iPhone business, so that their share in the revenue of smartphone is 60%. So their share in 2021, their share of smartphone business was 60%, whereas the number of units is only 14%. And this is how you see the fact that the market for smartphone is competitive. Anyone can enter. It is completely complying by the law, by antitrust laws, permitting free entry of anyone who wants to create a new smartphone. But in order for you to beat Apple, you have to innovate a smartphone which is better than the iPhone and cheaper than the iPhone, and nobody has been able to do that. So that Apple is able to use its technological advantage of assembling all these technologies that are embodied in the iPhone, with which they control the top segment of the market, but that gives them the biggest revenue and the highest profits.
And one of your arguments is that a lot of companies that, in theory would present competition to a company like Apple are actually developed from the very outset, hoping to be acquired by the company that they're operating in, whatever company it is that dominates in that space. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset and how it kind of affects competition overall?
Well, the technological competition requires you to innovate something. Otherwise, you can't make any progress. So now, if you're confronting a company which is well-established monopolist, has been in the business already, and you innovate something new, would you then go into war with that established company, with that well-financed company? You're just an upstart. It is therefore much easier for you to sell to the big guy, become a millionaire or billionaire overnight, rather than going to a war with a well-established antagonist. Therefore, technological competition doesn't solve the problem of this technologically based monopoly, because in a technological race, there's always one winner. And if the dominant player is already in the market, competitors prefer to sell rather than compete head-on with that.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to policy and start with some of the history, what we can learn from the first Gilded Age. Real change really only started with Theodore Roosevelt's ascent to the presidency after the assassination of William McKinley. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how efforts to use policy way back then ended up playing out.
Well, if you go back to late 19th century, you will find an enormously growing breach in society. Rich and poor are getting, the division is getting bigger and bigger with time. And at the same time, in fact, my estimate is that in 1901, the proportion, okay, I wanted to define the concept of monopoly profits. Mm-hmm. Monopoly, in my calculations, the income of a company are divided into three: labor income, normal capital income, and monopoly profits. So monopoly profits as a proportion of total income created by a company is a good measure of market power. In 1901, the market power, the proportion of profits, monopoly profits, in the income of private sector firms was 30%. In the United States, in 2017, 2017 is the last year that I was able to compute it, was 25%. So that the proportion of profits, monopoly profits in the two ages are very, very similar. But the Gilded Age is also defined in terms of the cultural values, in terms of the materialistic search for individual success, preference for profits over public needs, abandoning the need for infrastructure that supports the public, and other criteria that promotes profits over cooperative social values. And the two Gilded Age basically have almost the same income distribution, the same inequality, and the same forces operating in both eras. Now, the first Gilded Age, technically historians measure it between 1860, which it's end of the Civil War, and 1914. But actually, the height of this first Gilded Age is between 1880 and 1910. 1901 was this accidental rise of Theodore Roosevelt to ascending to the presidency because of the assassination of McKinley, and he began the change by introducing legislation that was desired by the progressive movement. The progressive movement has a whole array of programs by which they wanted to change, and the same thing is happening today. If you look at the programs among the progressive forces in the United States, they're talking about similar things, simple desire, as it was in 1901. So 1901 and 2021 are very similar.
Yeah, and I think Theodore Roosevelt, when we think back on him today, he surprised a lot of people. He surprised a lot of his contemporaries because he came up as a son of privilege.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we forget how long, his reforms took to actually take hold. I wonder if you can talk about that. How long did it really take for us to see his ideology sort of entrench itself in policy?
It went very, very slowly. It began with reforms of food and drug, and then it went on to introducing the income tax in the Constitution, and then the creation of Federal Reserve, and slowly, all the way to 1937. And the main force that was hindering that development was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was resisting the reform movement, insisting on laissez-faire economics. And this also led to the final confrontation between the Supreme Court and Theodore and FDR. And finally, it came down to the final surrender of the Supreme Court in a decision in 1937 that had to do with legislation about labor in the state of Washington. And they allowed minimum wage. they resisted even the introduction of minimum wage. And that period between 1901 and 1937 is very much known in legal circles as periods in which the Supreme Court was resisting the introduction of reform ideas and was sticking to old laissez-faire ideas without allowing any government intervention to improve the conditions of the economy. And I must say the Supreme Court is doing the same thing today.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, which is bring us into the second Gilded Age, which really begins in the 1980s. And what were some of the key policies, especially in the Reagan administration, that still define the way this policy looks now?
The most important components of that policy was, number one, a dramatic reduction in the tax rate. And the tax rates between 1935 and 1980, Elliott the marginal income tax was 92%. It went down, and in 1963 went down to 70%, and remained pretty much 70% all the way to 1980. So under the Reagan administration was decreased drastically to 26%, with some changes. Secondly, great effort were made during the New Deal era to use the law as much as possible to curtail technological and any monopoly power, using various techniques, but mostly by extracting the cash out of the firms. The Reagan administration, under the interpretation of antitrust law from Chicago, has essentially abandoned any effort to apply antitrust. And as a result of that, I think that this giving up on antitrust is the main force that enabled the growth of market power until today. And here's the measure. In 1980, the proportion of monopoly profits out of income created by the private sector was about 5%. And in 2017, I measured it to be about 25%. And monopoly wealth is the market creation, the stock market creation of wealth in the form of stock values, which capitalizes the profits which are monopoly profits. That monopoly wealth rose from zero in 1980 to $25 trillion in 2019. Think about it. $25 trillion was monopoly profit, rising from zero to 25 trillion between those two periods, 1980 to 2017.
That's remarkable. And before we move on, I mean, what you're laying out here is this argument that market power really derives from technology, but also policy. And I just wonder if there's anything else you want to add to that before we move on.
No, what I'm saying is that the essence of policy is the ability to stop firms from using those strategies that I talked about at the beginning of consolidating their market power. Because it is very important to understand that we are dealing with a very big conflict here between the desire to compensate innovators for their innovations. We don't want to see less innovations. We want to see innovations and innovators being compensated. But we don't want them to use that power in order to accumulate and consolidate and create an empire, technological empires, in which they benefit not only for their own innovations, but innovations of others. Because if you take the 237 companies that went into Microsoft and divide them into 5, they would have 5 Microsofts and these 5 Microsofts would have been competing against each other, we would have more products, we'll have more productivity, we'll have more variety, and we'll have less monopoly profits and better for the consumers. And so that what the issue in front of us, and this is the issue that was raised by the policy that was followed since 1980, is to what extent laissez-faire economics is the right medicine for America. The consequence of that, as we can see, is the rise of inequality in a dramatic way.
I think what's striking too is the fact that there are laws on the books, there are policies out there in our country that are there to address monopoly power. And in the book, you talk about this tension between antitrust law and patent law. I wonder, why do you think it is that patent law, even historically, has tended to get the upper hand?
Well, I think the reason is because many people, including myself, during the period between 1930 and 1980, we saw a long period in which relative income remained the same. And I as a student, I grew up on the idea that income inequality is constant. It doesn't change. In fact, many people have written important books about the glory of capitalism, of creating a wonderful environment for democracy to flourish and to create fairness in distribution. It turns out that that's not true, that in fact, it doesn't work that way.
Well, so why do you think it is that patent law has seemed to have, I think I used the term upper hand before, tends to win out in court.
I didn't follow through your full question. Yeah, so because of that, the feeling was that what's important is to get innovations, because innovations give us progress and give us technological improvements and rising standard of living. And if you give a patent, if you award a patent for an innovator, the patent will expire, and the innovation will become the monopoly power will disappear. So we usually think of monopoly power granted to innovations as something which is transitory and a very small price to pay to get progress. Mm-hmm. This is the basic feeling of most economists. It used to be. But the data shows something else. The data shows that once you develop market power, once you allow it to do whatever they want, to be completely free to choose their way, their technologies and the strategies of development and investment strategies and whatever interlocking patterns they create, the consequences could not be as desirable as we used to think. And that is the big change. And the consequence of that is that patent law and antitrust laws are in conflict. But antitrust actually exempts monopoly profits from consideration of antitrust. It's regarded as innocent profits. Antitrust law regards monopoly profits as innocent profits. So the $25 trillion created between 1980 and 2017 is innocent wealth, except it went into just a very few hands.
Right. So
innocently.
So it sounds like what you're saying is we've sort of made this not a formalized agreement by any stretch, but we've made this trade-off as a society that we're going to make that compromise in exchange for economic growth.
That's right.
We're going to allow patent law to win out in this ever-present competition because that's the priority.
Yes, I think that's exactly true. And it's not, the truth of the matter is that it's not only patent laws, because many firms use trade secrets rather than patent law, because patent law has some great advantage. It requires firms to disclose exactly what their technology is, and to allow other people to fully understand and incorporate it legally speaking, using legal means, so that the technology is known. When you have a trade secret, you don't really know what the information is. You don't have the knowledge. So the idea is that if you have the patent, and the patent will expire soon, and monopoly power will be very short and will not have bad consequences, then we should be very happy with it, and let patent law have the priority.
And you talked earlier about, the different methods that companies use to scaffold their innovations, their patents, et cetera, in order to keep competition out or limit competition. I wonder if you can kind of put a button on that, because patents are supposed to be temporary. And, one might think over time, doesn't the market take care of all this? Doesn't competition ultimately take care of this? So why is it that it's just so challenging to beat an incumbent, or to make a reasonable run at an incumbent, given the way the patent laws are set up right now?
Well, I'll give you an example. If a drug company comes with a new drug, and the drug has a patent, 20 years patent, and the drug, you take it twice a day. That's the dose. 3 years, 4 years later, the company refigures this thing and comes up with the same drug, exactly the same drug, except that you take it once a day, not twice a day. You don't take it in morning, evening, but you take it only once before you go to sleep. That's a new patent. So just the change of the dose is a new patent. And therefore, your patent just extended for 24, because you got extra 4 years, because you got a patent for 20 years, so it starts all over again. Now, if you arrange a mountain of patents, interrelated patents, and then you get 3 other technologies which are related to it, it's not in drugs, but in other cases, the technologies are interrelated, then they become very, very difficult to break. And although you want the patent to last only 20 years and then expire, it doesn't happen that way. Patents last for a long time. And moreover, they patent everything. If you took the incandescent lamp, there are about 25 different things in the lamp. Each component is being patented too. And therefore, the patents on the incandescent lamp begin in the late 19th century and continue until 1925. So for 30 years, there were patents of all kinds of patents on the incandescent lamp. So that
this is the example of General Electric, right?
Yes, this is the example of General Electric, yes. But so patents are very easy. They are too easy. People get patents much too easy, and there are many patents which are completely unnecessary and unjustified. In fact, I personally make a distinction between primary patents and secondary patents. Primary patents are patents which are on truly new innovation. A secondary patent is patent that depends upon a primary patent. And in fact, many of the patents are secondary patents. And one of my suggestions, we'll talk about policy later, I hope, that is to make a distinction between the two, not to allow these secondary patents to come in so easily, and to allow the creation of these complicated legal barriers.
Well, I do want to talk about consequences of monopoly power with you, because I think it's really important to understanding where the country is right now. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of how monopoly power has exacerbated inequality? What did you learn about that relationship in the course of your research?
Okay, so the key is to notice the fact that if you buy my idea that the main source is is monopoly profits. These monopoly profits go to companies that are engaged in innovations or buying innovations or combining innovations, but there are innovations associated with that. And people who own those companies is a very small number of people. There are a very small number of people who own major components of the stock market. Most people don't own any stocks. Common workers in America have small components of their wealth in the stock market in the form of pension funds. But the large component, so that if you look at this $25 trillion that I talked about earlier, it goes to those people who own the stocks. And that's a very small number of people. And monopoly profits, when they come in, okay, maybe I need to take one step back. If you have a monopoly, a monopolist cuts back on the output. In order to keep prices higher, you have to maintain low output. Low output means that you have less demand for labor and less demand for capital. That means that wages and income of workers is being suppressed. Income of retirees and other people who use income from capital, ordinary interest income, these are suppressed, so that if you have an increase in monopoly profits, it has to be that labor income and capital income is decreased. I very often joke to my friends and say that Karl Marx had it all wrong. He thought that capital and labor capital is exploiting labor. I say, no, capital is not exploiting labor. It's technology that's exploiting capital and labor. And this is what happens here, because if you have 25 of the income that is created by a company goes to monopoly profits, and that goes to a very small number of people, then you can see how the technology is causing this enormous stretch in which a large proportion of the wealth, a large proportion of the income is going to a small number of people who own those enterprises, whereas the rest of us are receiving less wages, lower income from labor, slower growth of income of labor, and less income paid for retirees and other sources of capital investments.
Mm-hmm. And I think, just consuming the news, we're all very familiar with this notion that this phenomenon impacts society, right? People feel left behind. You have growing division. I wonder if there's anything else that you want to contribute to that discussion. And also this idea that, like, once you've been left behind and are no longer part of the middle class, how hard is it feasible for people in that category to make their way back into that strata that they might have once occupied?
Well, the story that I'm telling is actually being supplemented by another story that goes parallel to that, and that is the way technology actually influenced our life. And that is that if you think about the technology of the early part of the 20th century, the assembly line created enormous number of jobs that could be performed by people who had a very good discipline and were able to do repetitive work, but didn't require college education. This gave rise to the blue-collar worker of America, who was able to lead middle-class life, comfortable life, with vacation and education for their children, and something to be saved for life, for later in life. The computer did exactly the opposite. It simply replaced all these people who were working on repetitive jobs, so that the technology that I was talking about in terms of the distribution also had another discriminating effect of eviscerating all the jobs that were essentially repetitive. As a result of that, the middle class, the blue-collar worker of America, good portion of the blue-collar workers of America were pushed into into poverty, if you wish, or income that was below the income they used to have before, and they are not in the middle class any longer. Today, they are in fact in the lower strata of income. So that technology had the effect of promoting the income of educated people, whereas it damaged the income of the uneducated. I mean, those college educated versus the college uneducated, those that did not have college education. In addition to that, most of those people also were concentrated in regions of the country that were typically rural. So that technology also, in this case, created a structure of conflict between the urban and rural population of America. This is how essentially, these are the foundations of Trumpism.
Mm-hmm. We're getting a lot of really great questions in the Q&A, by the way, so I'm really looking forward to sharing some of those with you, Professor Kurz, in just a couple of minutes. But before we do that, I wanted to get your take on some of the events playing out in the news right now. Obviously, the Biden administration has taken a very specific stance on the issue of monopoly power and on antitrust. So for people who aren't aware, early in his presidency, he signed an executive order, Joe Biden signed an executive order that aimed to reset the direction of our country's antitrust policy. So among the many things that it tries to address, it encourages regulators at the federal level to crack down on things like non-compete agreements and sharing of salary information among employers. I wonder, I think that was probably about 1.5 to 2 years ago that executive order was signed by the president. I'm curious how you feel it's played out, what kind of impact it's had.
I'm very supportive of that. And in fact, I have in my book also some exactly the same kind of ideas on reforms in labor market, and I agree with that. I think these are very highly desired reform because the American workers is under severe distress today. However, I think that the overall effect of the Biden administration so far has been very minimal, because I don't think that they have, in my opinion, they don't have the legal tools to do that. Because as I've just explained, technology is being exempt from antitrust. Technology and market power based on technology is legal. It's not prevented. And without a law that will allow the government and society to limit the ability of this creation of technological empires by accumulation and by various other methods, we're not going to make any progress, in my opinion.
May I just interject for a moment? Because I think people might be wondering, a lot of people in the audience have probably heard of Lena Khan, who now heads the Federal Trade Commission and has, made a lot of, I would say, vocal moves, has made it clear, her intent, which is to try to enforce anti-laws that already are on the books to work to the maximum extent possible, not to necessarily rewrite the law or add more laws, because obviously that involves Congress, and we've seen efforts stunted there, even as recently as 2020. But I wonder, if your argument is that the Biden administration's effectiveness has been fairly minimal, does it matter to at least have this culture shift within in the White House, where for decades you haven't had the same commitment to trying to follow through and enforce? Does it matter to have an administration and operators within places like the FTC who are ostensibly very committed to trying to enforce what's already available to them?
Yes, absolutely. And this is exactly why we're having this webinar. And this is why you and I are talking about it, because this is in the air. Everybody understands that there's something there and we need to do something about it. And this is what I want to contribute as well. Miss Khan is struggling to change the course in which the courts after 1980 were very much influenced by the Chicago school that influence their thinking of antitrust to be based only on the effect on consumers. And on the basis of effect of consumers, most antitrust was mutilated and muted or mutilated, whichever way you want to look at it. Lena Khan wants to change it and to push back to think about the structure of business, the nature of business as reflecting monopoly power and not only looking at the consumer. So she's pushing the boundary of the existing laws to look at the business practices, not only on the consumer. And she's right, she's absolutely right. And to that extent, I applaud her effort. But she's now pushing against the existing law. She's pushing against what the courts have already agreed to do, and that is thinking only of the consumers. So she needs to re-educate the courts as well. Her struggle is both with her own people within the government of wanting to push the boundary away back to think about the structure of markets, the kind of business, the way business being conducted, but she's not able to talk about technology. For example, in the lawsuits against Microsoft, the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. That's a very good example.
Yeah, let me just interject briefly for people who aren't familiar. So this is a company that Microsoft has targeted. It's a video game publisher that makes Call of Duty and Candy Crush, I believe.
Right.
And to my understanding, I think this would be the largest consumer tech takeover in decades. So we're talking about something like a $69 or $70 billion deal.
Right. Yes. Okay. Microsoft is a very small player in the games. In electronic games, I think they have about 14% of the market, which is a small. They are small. There are other players much bigger than that. So the history of acquisitions since 1980 would have been this is an integration of two companies, and they are not in the same business, and they are one is small and the other one is a little bigger. This will give Microsoft some bigger voice in that business. Would have been a completely acceptable acquisition before, but Ms. Khan understands that that is part of the empire building that I was talking about earlier, and she doesn't want to see that happening. So she is now accusing Microsoft not for wanting to be big and to be powerful, which is the real aim, but she's accusing Microsoft of prohibiting other players from getting some desirable games which Activision has. Mm-hmm. But Microsoft announced these games will be available for anyone, in spite of their absolute declaration that they will not discriminate, they will allow anybody to use it. She wants to proceed with a lawsuit. And again, it shows you that she's unable to achieve what she wants, i.e. Microsoft power. She wants to restrict Microsoft power, and she's right. Microsoft is a big monopolist, and we need to cut back that monopoly power, but she doesn't have the law on her side. The missing law is the one that I'm proposing, and that is that you should be able to attack the power directly.
Well, I think what we're going to see potentially is some very creative applications or theories of the law as it exists today. So perhaps, one way to look at this case is that, yes, these two companies, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, aren't direct competitors today, but if allowed to continue on, maybe they would be down the road. And so we may see an argument like that crop up, I suppose.
Yes, but that's not exactly what the law says.
Well, I would love to pause there for right now, and we're going to come back to some of your policy prescriptions in a little bit, but I do want to get some of these really great questions in front of you, Professor Kurz. Okay. One of them comes from Alan Schleifer, and I thought this was interesting because I feel like I can hear someone in the audience thinking this if they didn't actually go ahead and put it in the chat, which is iPhones No, actually, I think I'm reading the wrong one. Forgive me. Where did it go? He's got a couple in here, so I'm a little bit thrown. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is the one. I think it's this one. iPhones phenomenally increase productivity, very, very low cost per hour of use. Thousands of companies have millions of apps. So this sort of argument that, what's the big deal? This technology is great for us. I can work from anywhere. And actually, it helps create jobs in the form of other applications that might be created, other companies creating things that will live on my iPhone. So do you want to respond to that one?
I think that this is right. I think iPhone is a fantastic innovation and it makes everybody very happy. I have no problem with that.
Yeah. And he says, why shouldn't they be rewarded?
No. I am perfectly happy to reward them. I want to reward them. But do they need to be rewarded with 80% profit margin? Maybe 20% profit margin would have been enough. There's no question. There's no question that the iPhone innovation is fantastic. I just don't believe that they deserve to receive 80% profit margin. Mm-hmm. And what I would like to see is other companies, and the evidence shows that the other companies could have been created along the way that would have been more competitive. The market for the smartphone would have been more competitive if there was less concentration of knowledge in one hand. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I have no problem with the iPhone. Please, I am in favor of the iPhone. I'm in favor of compensating innovators. I don't believe that they deserve to be compensated by a very high profit margin. And I would like to see more competition among technologies that will enable more companies to arise and more technologies to exist and more parallel research, because there are more companies, there are more products, there's more research, and the consumers will be paid less.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it makes me wonder, what are some good metrics to be looking at when you decide, has a company gone too far? Is it too successful? Is it profit margin? Are there other metrics? And then who's to decide that 80% is too much and what the right percentage would be? Lynn Miller asks, what about enacting limits on tech patents as is done with pharmaceuticals? And she notes that pharmaceutical patents expire after 20 years. You kind of touched on this a little bit. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't want to limit patents. What I want to make a distinction between primary patent and secondary patent. I want a secondary patent to be given half of the length of life of the primary patent. There are so many secondary patents, and they receive 20 years each time a new innovation comes in. And I say, no, I want to give it only 10 years. It's enough. That way, the companies don't play with a patent as a way of extending the life of their domination, of their market power. So that I want innovators to be compensated, but I don't the patent law to be abused. Also, I think that patents should not be issued. Patents should become more difficult to obtain, more demanding, should be more real innovations involved. There are many, many patents that are so nonsensical that there are companies that are buying those patents just for litigation purposes. These are horrible companies that engage in activities of buying useless patents just to sue anybody getting close to them. That I would like to see gone. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is called the patent trolls.
That's right. Yes. Do you see, this is from an anonymous attendee, do you see the increasing injection of AI into people's lives, especially in knowledge management and human resources, would due to the inequality? I think summarizing that question, how is AI, artificial intelligence, expected to change any of this? If you have thoughts on that.
I don't, it's too early to tell.
Too early to tell.
Yes, it'll be highly speculative it'll be highly speculative on my part to speculate on that. We don't have enough AI out there to tell what effect it will have.
Here's another one from Alan Schleifer, who asks, and sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Alan. Thank you for these questions, everybody. He says, but many formerly dominant companies have fallen hard. And he notes the examples of Eastman Kodak, Research in Motion, which owns BlackBerry. I think it's just called BlackBerry now. Yeah. And don't unicorns have the opportunity to challenge dominant companies? So isn't there plenty of...
Yes. I have a whole section of my book is dedicated to this question on chapter 1. So I would invite Alan to read my chapter 1. The issue is more complicated, obviously. There's a distinction, and I'll take a moment to summarize that. There's a distinction between competition within a paradigm and competition for a paradigm. Now, think about it this way. There are innovations like electricity, steam engine, internet, which change everything. When those kind of innovations come, then the market is truly competitive. Everybody is in a free fall. But once a paradigm is established, the initial winners are established, the evidence shows that competition doesn't exist any longer. In other words, incumbents are very strong, and the number of cases in which a challenger wins is very, very small. In most cases, it's like the Microsoft case, the leader simply buys the challengers. And therefore, the idea that somebody will come and challenge the leader is a myth. And the case of the examples that he gave are correct. But these are examples occur during the transition between the old paradigm to the new paradigm. So during the transition, you've got many companies die because they cannot adapt, they cannot reinvent themselves, they cannot adjust to the new paradigm. And then there is a period in which there is severe competition. But that competition does not extend to the 100 years after the paradigm is established. Please,
Jeremy.
Yes.
Jeremy Baskin asks, he says, there is a very formidable legal industry which lobbies for a complicated and lengthy patent process. Continuation patents and other exotic IP instruments result in a tremendous amount of billable hours for this industry, making IP lawyers among the highest paid type. Do you envision any reforms against this industry? You mentioned patent trolls. Simplification.
I want the patent office to be much better equipped with technology, people, with scientists who can make judgment, so that there will be much fewer patents being issued, and there will be much greater consensus of what is a new true innovation, where there is no disagreement, and what is a secondary innovation. In other words, there must be much stronger examination within the patent office, much more technology and science in the patent office, so that the ambiguity will go away and the role for lawyers will decrease dramatically. I want an increase in the role of scientists in the patent office and decrease in the role of lawyers.
Nicola asks, does Professor Kurz have any comments on the issues raised by Gonzalez versus Google, the case that the Supreme Court heard yesterday, with regard to continuing to protect tech giants and social media moguls from lawsuits over the content of their users' posts? So this is the Section 230 question.
Yes. Okay, it's a very complicated question, but I have not really been able to make up my mind on this question. My original thought was that, well, I want to pass on that one. I don't know. I am conflicted on this question. I'm strongly uncomfortable with what happens in this business of content which is being used on Facebook, for example, the vast amount of information, false information, deceitful information that goes in there is so much. On the other hand, freedom of speech is there as well. And I don't have any position on that yet.
Okay. Patrick Schlemmer asks, do you see Amazon innovating in the right direction by just getting into new businesses such as medical, so the health industry, and also in the movie business? That's Patrick from Germany.
That's an excellent question. And I actually devote a section in the book on that question. There's a little section in which I raised the question of breaking up these large companies, companies like Google and Amazon, which have so many different businesses and they're unrelated businesses. Mm-hmm. I believe that this kind of combining lots and lots of businesses which are unrelated ultimately will fail, as it failed in the past.
That's right. It feels like a throwback, doesn't it?
Oh yes, it's the throwback to 1970s, 1980s, and it's the conglomeration business. And I have no objection to them being broken up by law. Okay, what I do say that it's become very important to be very careful when you come and try to break a company to make sure that you're breaking exactly without reducing efficiency. To the extent that there's any dependence between the sections, I don't think they should be separated. But if there's no dependence between them, I see no difficulty in including in antitrust laws that permit the companies for breaking up simply because they're too powerful, too strong. So that yes, this is a subject that should be considered. I'm in favor of considering it. And it should be on the table for further discussion, public discussion, and better examination. I'm not an expert in corporate organizations. You know, I'm very careful before I will form an opinion about any specific case. But the principle is clear that those conglomerations don't work, and there's no reason why they should be there.
I want to kind of return to the discussion we were having about the Biden administration's posture in this space. And that executive order got a lot of interest and a lot of news headlines when it was signed. Some were even saying 2021, when it was signed, could mark a kind of turning point, the beginning of the end of the second Gilded Age. I wonder if you can just share some thoughts on that. Does that argument sound overblown to you?
No, I don't think so. I think there is something in the total package that Biden presents, and I'm not here to try to make a political speech or anything. I'm looking only at the economic nature of the program, which deviates dramatically from the laissez-faire position that we have lived through from 1980 until 2020. I personally believe that the idea that the government is not the solution, that government is the problem, is this sentence, is the greatest fallacy in American life, in American political life. The government is us together, all of us, trying to do things better. The government regulations, a government regulation is issued to correct for market failure. We regulate food quality, otherwise people will sell us contaminated food. We regulate medicines so that people will not sell us snake oil as a remedy for cancer. And so are other regulations. They come about. The good regulations are there to correct for market failures. Therefore, the government is an essential component for the success of capitalism. I want capitalism to succeed. I want capitalism to work well with democracy. But capitalism has, by itself, could become a very destructive force. And that is what we need to understand. At least that is my position. Mm-hmm. And what we see in 2021 is a change to make the government work for us, make the government fix the roads, make the government give us better charging stations for our cars, making the governments help poor people in rural America to come back to the middle class. The government can come in and provide all the assistance that we need to fix what's wrong with America today. Mm-hmm. And that is the change that I see. And I see that this is a good change. Is this the end of the second Gilded Age? I don't know. But it smells very much like 1901. That's exactly what happened in 1901. When Theodore Roosevelt came to power in 1901, that's exactly what he did. He took all the ideas of laissez-faire economics and put them aside and said, look, how do we use the government to make it better for us, or for all of us? The government is all of us. How do we make it better? And he created Federal Reserve. He created the Food and Drug Administration. He created income tax. I mean, you go down the road and see what they created between 1901 and 1937, and this is what we live today. Mm-hmm. So I think today we are maybe on the verge of a reform that will maybe remedy some of the ills that we live in America today. We can't go on with this inequality. We can't go on with the amount of breakdown in society. We didn't talk about the relationship between inequality and the breakdown of democracy. But the fact is that we now are facing enormous battle between the educated, those Americans who have college education, and those that don't have college education, and between those who live in cities and those who live in rural areas. And a good portion of that comes as a result of the technological changes that we have faced. Mm-hmm.
Well, Stuart asks, what function are you trying to maximize when you advocate for a more equitable distribution of wealth, overall human happiness, for example, and how do you stop short of socialism?
I do not want socialism. I want capitalism. I want good capitalism that works for everybody, exactly the way we have always thought about it. We thought about it as a system in which people will receive exactly what they deserve. Innovations create a problem for capitalism. You have to say, I didn't catch his name. What's his name? Stuart. Innovations create a problem. Think about it. If you have a market in which everybody is equal, everybody is small, everybody is equal opportunity, there comes along some guy who innovates something. At that moment, he becomes a monopolist. This is not free competition anymore. So technology innovations create a problem for capitalism. Capitalism has to deal with that. What we know is competition doesn't solve that. Competition doesn't solve the problem. The evidence shows it conclusively. So how do we deal with that? How do we preserve capitalism in the face of a massive wave of innovations as we are going through today? The question is how to preserve capitalism. We don't want socialism. I don't ask for socialism, and I don't have a formula of how should inequality be. I have a formula that says what I don't want excessive power to be, and then let the market decide, subject to that restraint. Let the market and capitalism determine what distribution should come about. In other words, I want the distribution to come about when companies work subject to the restrictions that we as society put on them and prevent them from doing certain things, the outcomes of which we don't like. And I'm talking about all of us, not me or you.
Do you want to tackle the question about how different states manage their industries as a way to, this is also in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee. Do you see a difference in how states manage their industries as a way to measure what regulation triggers more innovation and less inequality? So do some states do this better than others? And this person brings up the difference between Texas and California, for example.
I think that the major difference between Texas and California is only income tax. I mean, I don't believe that they have any major differences in technological policies. So income tax is not the only criteria. But most of what I'm talking about is actually looking for federal policy.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything that I have researched that I can speak with authority is on federal policy. I did not study any, I don't know of any, I don't know, man, I haven't studied differences among states. I happen to know about California because I live here, and I know about Texas because I happen to read about it. But otherwise, I don't really know much about the differences among states. Most of the work that I've done are about policy on a federal level.
Sure. Well,
but I don't believe the difference between California and Texas is in technological policies towards technology. I think they're pretty much the same. The main difference is in income tax.
Okay. I'll just throw out there that, you know, here in California, we pride ourselves on creating new laws that we hope will be picked up by other parts of the country, or because of our, you know, economic heft, that will sort of force themselves onto industries. I think that's how a lot of lawmakers see California and policy making here. So I'll just. But
the characteristic of California about technology is the existence of no laws. And so is the case in Texas. There are virtually no limitations on technology, which is of nature and we are talking about here in this webinar. I mean, surely the usual arguments about pollution and safety at work, but this is OSHA type of stuff. It's not technology specific.
Or privacy, you know, that's
privacy, yes. Okay, California is a little ahead, yes, a little stronger on privacy, but I don't think that the difference is that significant.
Fair. Giannis asks, I don't buy the innovation advantage. Tesla's pioneering innovations didn't earn him, meaning Elon Musk, any advantage. No, actually, forgive me. I think he means Tesla. Nicola, pioneering innovations didn't earn him any advantage. On the contrary, he was forced to forfeit the value of his innovation. So the trick of inequality is not in education. It's not in self-empowerment, but in coercion and regulatory and legal advantage, which is provided by government to the elites. Do you want to comment on that, Mordecai?
I disagree. The evidence is overwhelming that that's not true. The overwhelming evidence is that it doesn't work that way. That in fact, Tesla right now has an enormous advantage over the others, and I don't know. It is very hard to say how long it will control that. It will control the market. I mean, it has more than 60% of the market for electric vehicles.
I think I need to correct myself, and I'm not sure if you caught this, but I think he's referring to Nikola Tesla from way back in the day. So that was my initial mistake.
Oh, I see. Yes, I understand. Yes, this is no. He's now making a very good point. The company that is the first to innovate is not necessarily going to be the company that will be established as the winner of the new paradigm. If there's a new paradigm, as you remember, I talked about the new paradigm. So once a new paradigm is established, there will be a race. And I said there will be a race. Everybody is part of that competition. There will be a winner of that race. That will be the innovator that I'm talking about. That innovator becomes the one that is established. And that innovator will be there for next 50 or 100 years. In 1892, General Electric was a combination of a few companies that simply combined together around the innovations of the incandescent lamp and electricity, except they had only the direct current. They control only direct current. And in order to do a little bit better, they had to make an agreement in 1896 with Westinghouse, and Westinghouse controlled the alternating current. And between the two of them, they made a compact. They didn't compete, but they made a compact and controlled the market between the two of them. They controlled the market for a long time, until the electronic age. General Electric was a marvel of technology throughout the 20th century. So surely the first company to innovate is not necessarily going to be the winner. There will be a winner of the original stage in which the paradigm shift arises. Electricity comes, internet comes, computer comes, competition, a winner, and then there's this whole period of 50 to 100 years in which the dominant company maintains, in most cases, its position.
Mm-hmm.
That's the evidence. This is not theory.
So we've got about 10 minutes to go and a couple more questions. Thank you for all of these great questions, by the way. Just so that we don't run out of time, what can you share in terms of, anything that you haven't said yet about policy, how to make it better? You talked a little bit about reforms, your suggested reforms on patent law earlier. So I think we can skip that. But is there anything else that you want to say with respect to policy prescriptions before we go back to the questions?
Yes, I said I want also a reform of antitrust law. Mm-hmm. Antitrust law, in my opinion, should say specifically that the law prohibits the accumulation of technological market power, which is above and beyond the level that was specified in patent law, which means that once you begin to accumulate technologies, competing technologies, by aggregating them through mergers and acquisitions, at some point you exceed the level that was given to the individual pieces by patents. You get more power than you actually have from the pieces. That should be prevented. That means I want antitrust law to be able to prevent many of the companies to utilize many of those strategies which are outlined in chapter 1 of my book, about 11 different strategies. That's number one. Number two is the reform of patent law that we talked about. Number three, I think that we should establish an income tax on corporate income tax that will tax only monopoly profits, which means each industry will have its own normal return on capital. Mm-hmm. Capital flows into industry. Capital should be rewarded. It's the competitive reward for capital. But anything above it is in profits is defined as monopoly profits. That extra, if the normal return in the industry is say 12%, and you make 80%, the difference between 18 and 15% will be taxed as monopoly profits, and that should be taxed by tax which does not exceed 50%. I'm personally in favor of 50%. It tax 50% according to my calculations. I've devoted chapter 10 to the subject. It considers all the alternatives, and the trade-off that it entails suggests to me that the effect of innovations will be very, very small. In other words, a tax on these monopoly profits will not have substantial impact on innovations. Mm-hmm. Then, yeah.
Did you also mention the, I think it was the proposal that any company with $500 million in revenue should be prevented from acquiring competitors? You mentioned that, right?
Yes, but that is in item number 1. In item number 1, I propose that when company has profits, a revenue of more than $500 million, it should be prevented from acquiring any company that complements its technology, that it expands the realm of its technology. Simply, you don't want acquisitions for the creation of technological market power. Just the purpose of mergers which are aiming to increase market power should be avoided, should be prevented by the company reaches $500 million. That means that I'm in favor of acquisitions. I want small companies to acquire small companies. That allows more companies to be created. That allows more, instead of having one Microsoft, we end up with 5 Microsofts. Instead of one Google, we have 5 Googles. And they will be competing among themselves. They will offer multiple products, and they will offer better prices to consumers.
Another great question from our Q&A comes from an anonymous attendee who asks, can you please talk about how race intersects with the inequalities of the second Gilded Age? My impression is that race exacerbates inequalities and in terms of access to technology, access to jobs in tech, and feeling the impacts on capital labor. But I wonder if you have anything else to add. Thank you for this presentation.
No, I think that this is what the person is saying is correct. And I think the key to that is exactly in my last recommendation, and that is the establishment of a much aggressive and permanent institutions to help people in the lower 50% of the income distribution, for the children of the people in the lower part of the income distribution to have better education and better health. And I want to see the racial divides to be broken by better education and better health for young people. I am not proposing any handout to the old. I'm not talking about providing help to old people who are poor. I'm talking about the children of people in the bottom 50% of the income distribution. These are the wasted resources of America. These children are the future of America. These are the children that we should educate. We should give them in good health and try to make them join the middle class. Give them the technological knowledge, give them the information that they become innovators, that they can indeed become millionaires. So yes, I think that the race question is now completely connected with the idea of improving the health and education of children of the bottom 50% of the income distribution. These are the people who suffered most from technology. For them, technology was not a great success. For them, technology was a destruction of their potential life in the middle class.
Okay. To dive deeper, this is from CLC Lab 07, to dive deeper on government intervention rather than a laissez-faire approach, how can government improve various startups with capital through newer technological innovation without a centralized state system?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. What is the question then?
Sure. The question reads, if we've established that there are problems with the laissez-faire approach, how can government improve various startup companies with capital through newer technological innovation without a centralized state system? So I guess what the question is.
No, I'm not in favor of any changes in finance of new technologies. I think that the existing system of venture capitalists and early starting, I don't propose that government should go into the business of starting new companies. Not at all. I mean, the government might decide to promote areas with public interest, like electric vehicles, because of the question of environment. But it doesn't mean that the government should choose companies. I don't think the government should choose companies. I think that if the government supports electric vehicles, then all companies that produce electric vehicles should receive the same support. Government should not be in the business of doing venture capital. Venture capital is doing a good job by itself.
We also have a question about how people in the audience can connect with you once the session is over. What is your preferred mode of contact?
Email.
Great, you look them up.
Look 'em up.
Stanford email address is out there. And I also want to mention that the recording of this session is going to be made available within the next 24 hours. So keep an eye out for that. Mordecai, is there anything else that you want to add in our final minute or two together? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, maybe a word of reflection. Senator Sherman, in 1890, standing on the floor of the Senate, made a speech. And the speech was beautiful, actually. What he said was, today we enacted legislation that will prevent people from developing and concentrating power unnecessarily. We don't want the creation of power and the abuse of power in America. This is a country of free people, and we need to be free from power. But he didn't understand that the law that he created only prevented bad people from ganging together to monopolize markets. He didn't understand that there's one more force is developing there. It's called technology. And that force can become a vehicle for enormous power. And if we let that free of charge, power will overcome and will take away our freedom. By allowing technology to go free and do whatever it wants, it becomes something that devours democracy and devours our freedom. And that is a very big choice we are making. We need to choose how to balance off reward for innovations and progress. It's a difficult choice. I understand it. I'm not in favor of socialism. I'm in favor of capitalism, but I want capitalism with fairness. Thank you.
Thank you so much for writing the book. It's called The Market Power of Technology, Understanding the Second Gilded Age. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, by the way, Mordecai. Thank you for doing this. And thanks to the people in the audience for participating, for watching, and for asking so many wonderful questions.
And thank you very much for your questions, and for the audience for all the terrific questions they asked me. I'm sorry I couldn't answer some because I don't want to talk about something that I don't know anything about.
Oh, you got a good bulk. I think you got the bulk of them. So we're gonna count it as a win. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.